Do you ever wonder if some moments are meant to test you? Cedric's voice carried through the crisp night air as the fire crackled between us, his dark eyes glinting with something unreadable. I glanced up from poking at the embers, caught off guard by his question. He sat across from me, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the glow of the flames, an almost magnetic pull in his presence. My dad, completely oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, laughed as he rummaged through the cooler for another beer. "Test you how?" I asked, my voice steady, though my chest felt tight. Cedric smirked faintly, leaning back in his chair. "You know, see how far you'll go before you break." That was Cedric, always throwing out these cryptic thoughts that seemed harmless on the surface, but left you unraveling them long after the conversation ended. He was my dad's oldest friend, a man who exuded confidence in a way that could be both intimidating and intoxicating. At 43, he had a rugged charm about him, salt and pepper stubble, a teasing smile that hinted at mischief, and a presence that filled whatever space he was in. This camping trip was supposed to be a father-son bonding experience, but my dad, always the social type, had invited Cedric along. I didn't mind. Cedric was fun, with a sarcastic wit that kept things lively. But somewhere in the past day or two, my perception of him had shifted. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was the way his laughter lingered in my ears, or how his casual touches seemed deliberate. Whatever it was, it left me restless. The campsite was nestled deep in the forest, surrounded by towering pines and a canopy of stars so vast it seemed endless. The three of us had spent the day hiking, fishing, and swapping stories over the fire. It was the kind of trip that was supposed to feel simple and wholesome. But now, as the firelight danced on Cedric's face, there was nothing simple about the way my stomach knotted whenever he looked at me. After my dad turned in for the night, leaving Cedric and me alone by the fire, the air between us felt charged. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. "You're quieter than usual tonight," he remarked, his voice low but piercing through the stillness. I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just tired, I guess." He studied me for a moment, then looked back at the fire. "Big day tomorrow. The hike up to the ridge is no joke." "Yeah," I said, though my thoughts weren't on the hike. They were on the tent arrangements. My dad's tent had ripped earlier when he'd carelessly set it up near some jagged rocks. He'd cursed about it for a good 20 minutes before Cedric offered his own as a backup. My dad, insisting it wasn't a big deal, decided to sleep in the car instead. That left Cedric's tent for the two of us. As the fire burned lower, Cedric stood and stretched, the hem of his shirt lifting just enough to reveal a sliver of toned skin. I looked away quickly, feeling a flush creep up my neck. "We should call it a night," he said, his voice casual. "Yeah, probably." I followed him to the tent, my heart pounding harder with every step. Inside, the space was tight, barely enough room for two people. Cedric unrolled his sleeping bag, his movements unhurried, while I fumbled with mine, feeling absurdly self-conscious. "Relax," he said with a soft laugh, his tone teasing. "I don't bite." I managed a weak smile, though my hands were still trembling as I zipped up the bag. When we finally lay down, the proximity was overwhelming. I could hear every breath he took, feel the faint heat radiating from his body. The quiet stretched on, heavy and thick. "You okay over there?" Cedric's voice broke through the darkness, startling me. "Yeah, fine," I mumbled. "Good," he said. "Wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable." There was a pause before he added, almost too softly, "You can trust me, you know." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I trusted him or myself. The forest outside was alive with nocturnal sounds, but inside the tent, it was just the two of us, lying inches apart. My dad, blissfully unaware, slept in the car less than 100 feet away. As my eyes closed, a part of me knew that whatever happened next would change everything. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to stop it. The darkness inside the tent felt suffocating, pressing against every unspoken word, every restrained impulse. I lay on my back, staring at the faint outline of the nylon roof, hyper-aware of Cedric's presence just inches away. His steady breathing should have been calming, but it only made my thoughts race. Can't sleep? His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of the night, it felt impossibly loud. No, I admitted, my voice catching in my throat. Cedric shifted, the sound of his sleeping bag rustling in the confined space. A moment later, I felt him turn toward me, though I didn't dare look. Something on your mind? I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. Not really. Just hard to relax. You've seemed tense all day, he murmured, his tone softer now, almost concerned. Is it me? The question hit harder than it should have. I turned my head to face him, the faint starlight filtering through the tent, casting shadows across his face. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes searched mine, probing for answers I wasn't ready to give. No, I said quickly, too quickly. It's not you. I mean, it's just everything. He didn't push, but he didn't look away either. The silence that followed was charged, the air between us electric. Then, without warning, his hand moved, slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed against mine where they rested between us, the touch so fleeting it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. I froze, every nerve ending in my body coming alive at once. I should have pulled away, said something to break the tension. Instead, I stayed still, my breath catching as his fingers grazed mine again, this time lingering. You're shaking, he observed, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. I'm not, I lied, though the quiver in my voice betrayed me. You don't have to be nervous, Cedric said softly. I'm not going to do anything you don't want. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. His hand didn't move, but it didn't pull away either. I knew what he was offering, knew the line we were both standing on, and yet I couldn't bring myself to stop him. When I finally turned fully toward him, Cedric's face was closer than I expected, his gaze intense and unwavering. This is wrong, I whispered, though the conviction in my voice wavered. Maybe, he admitted, his lips curving into a faint, almost regretful smile. But it doesn't feel wrong, does it? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his in the dark. The kiss was hesitant at first, tentative and unsure, but it didn't stay that way. Cedric responded with a hunger that matched my own, his hand sliding up to cup my face as he deepened the kiss. Every rational thought screamed at me to stop, but the moment consumed me. The way his lips moved against mine, the way his fingers tangled in my hair, it was intoxicating, overwhelming, and completely undeniable. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, Cedric rested his forehead against mine. We probably shouldn't do this, he said, his voice rough with restraint. I know, I replied, though neither of us moved to create distance. The weight of what we'd just done pressed down on me, mingling guilt and exhilaration into something I couldn't quite name. But Cedric's hand on my cheek, his thumb brushing gently over my skin, kept me anchored in the moment. You're incredible, you know that, he said quietly, his tone so genuine it caught me off guard. Don't, I whispered, my voice breaking. Don't say things like that. Why not? It's the truth. I didn't have an answer, so I kissed him again instead, letting the moment drown out the doubts and questions swirling in my mind. Cedric didn't hesitate this time, pulling me closer, his warmth seeping into me as the cold night pressed against the thin walls of the tent. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, caught in a bubble of stolen intimacy. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day and the emotional weight of the night began to take its toll. Cedric pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, his expression softer now, almost tender. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice a gentle command. "We can talk about this tomorrow." I nodded, though I doubted I'd get much rest. As I turned away and closed my eyes, I felt his hand linger on my shoulder for a moment longer before pulling back. The forest outside remained alive with the sounds of the night, but inside the tent, everything had changed. Whatever happened next, I knew there was no going back. The morning light filtered through the tent's thin fabric, a pale golden hue that signaled the start of a new day. I blinked awake, disoriented, the events of the night before crashing back into my consciousness like a tidal wave. Cedric was already sitting up, his broad back to me as he laced his boots. "Morning," he said without turning around, his voice carefully neutral. "Morning," I croaked, my throat dry. I sat up slowly, unsure of how to navigate the sudden weight between us. The small space felt stifling now, the intimacy of the night before replaced by a sharp awareness of what we'd done. My mind replayed every moment in vivid detail. The stolen touches, the heated kisses, the way I'd felt simultaneously alive and out of control. Cedric finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "We should probably pack up," he said, gesturing toward the mess of sleeping bags and gear around us. "Yeah," I muttered, avoiding his gaze. The silence between us as we dismantled the tent was heavy, each movement punctuated by the unspoken. My dad's voice carried from the other side of the campsite, cheerful and oblivious as he started a fire for breakfast. I felt a pang of guilt, so sharp it nearly doubled me over. By the time we joined my dad, Cedric had slipped effortlessly back into his usual charm, joking and laughing as if nothing had happened. I envied his composure. Meanwhile, I could barely look at him, or my dad, without feeling the weight of what I'd done. Throughout the day, Cedric was careful to keep his distance. His glances, though fleeting, carried a gravity that made my chest tighten. I wanted to talk to him, to make sense of what had happened, but I didn't know how to begin. It wasn't until we reached the ridge, a breathtaking overlook of the forest below, that Cedric finally pulled me aside. My dad had wandered off, camera in hand, eager to capture the view from every angle. "We need to talk," Cedric said, his voice low but firm. I nodded, my stomach twisting in knots. "What happened last night?" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "It can't happen again." I looked down at the dirt under my boots, my chest tightening. "I know. It's not that I regret it," he said quickly, his tone softening. "But it was reckless. For both of us." His words stung more than I expected, though I knew they were true. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Cedric sighed, his expression conflicted. "We forget it. We move on, and we make sure your dad never suspects a thing." I nodded, though the thought of erasing the memory felt impossible. "Is that really what you want?" "It doesn't matter what I want," he said, his tone carrying a finality that left no room for argument. We stood in silence for a long moment, the wind tugging at our clothes as the forest stretched endlessly before us. "Listen," Cedric said finally, his voice gentler now. "You're an incredible person, and I don't want you to think any less of yourself because of this. But we can't let this define us. You've got your whole life ahead of you, and I don't want to be the reason you look back and feel regret." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I won't forget it," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. A faint smile tugged at his lips, bittersweet and fleeting. "Neither will I." The ride back to the city was uneventful. the three of us falling into an easy rhythm of casual conversation that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface. Cedric dropped us off at home, his goodbye to my dad warm and friendly. When he turned to me, his expression softened, though he said nothing more than, "Take care of yourself, all right?" I watched him drive away, my chest aching with a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Guilt, longing, and an odd sense of closure swirled together, leaving me feeling hollow and full all at once. That night, as I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about Cedric's words, about the choices we make, the moments that test us, and the scars they leave behind. I didn't regret what had happened, not entirely, but I understood now the weight of crossing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Some moments define you, others haunt you, and some, like the one I'd shared with Cedric, do both.